Your Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode, I'll get into my Chicago Blackhawks defensive outlook while also discussing Marek Vanacker joining the Rockford IceHogs for the Calder Cup Playoffs, and Dan Bylsma and Peter Laviolette recently getting fired by the Seattle Kraken and the New York Rangers. Real quick, though, a reminder to please go hit that like button, hop in the comment section below. Let me know who you want to see me begin my season recaps with on Thursday. Should I begin with Connor Bedard, Alex Vlasic, Ryan Donato? Make sure to let me know in the comment section and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well. Last but certainly not least, all of which, by the way, is 100% free, will not cost you anything. Helps me out in a big time way in growing the show. But happy Tuesday, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Before I open things up here today with my Blackhawks defensive outlook, what I wanted to say first real quick is what an incredible start it's been to these Stanley Cup playoffs. They never disappoint, and last night in particular was absolutely incredible. Each and every game seemingly coming down to the wire. The Winnipeg Jets managing to hold off a late charge from the St. Louis Blues to take a 2-0 lead in that series. And as someone who picked the Winnipeg Jets to take home this year's Stanley Cup, and the Blues coming into the playoffs on a red-hot run, feels real good that Winnipeg was able to take down both games at home. Kyle Connor with a pair of clutch game-winning goals. Then we saw the Washington Capitals blow a 2-0 lead in the third period to the Montreal Canadiens. The kids for the Habs coming up clutch as Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki potted 2 goals to tie up the game. But Alex Ovechkin comes through in overtime. Believe it or not, his first ever overtime winner in the Stanley Cup playoffs, lifts the Caps to a 3-2 Game 1 win. Then the Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings. Oh my gosh. The Kings blow a 4-0 lead. Edmonton roars all the way back with 2 goals with under 2 minutes to go from Zach Hyman and Connor McDavid. But Blackhawks legend Phillip Danault with his second goal of the game in the final minute of regulation to put the Kings back on top 6-5. They win Game 1. And speaking of Blackhawks legends, the Stars and Avalanche game wound up going into overtime, and Colin Blackwell, another Blackhawks legend, with the overtime winner to even up that series. Absolutely electric start to this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. Has me even more excited than I normally am for what's going to transpire over these next couple of months. Pretty crazy to think we haven't even had Game 1 of every single series start yet, as Tampa Bay and Florida are set to begin here this evening. But enough of that, getting into my Chicago Blackhawks defensive outlook. For those of you who didn't check out yesterday's episode where I opened things up with my offensive outlook, like I did when the season wrapped up last year, I went through the Blackhawks in 3 parts: offense, defense, and goaltending. Kind of broke down the statistics as a team throughout the course of the season, as well as some individual numbers, and talk about what needs to be fixed. How can this unit in particular get better? How can general manager Kyle Davidson address some of the needs in this area in particular? Make sure to go and check out my offensive outlook episode that I dropped yesterday, and be on the lookout for my goaltending outlook episode that I will be dropping tomorrow. But diving into some team statistics defensively for the Blackhawks from the 24-25 campaign, starting off with goals per game. The Hawks were 31st in the NHL in this category. I mentioned yesterday a nice run for them late in the season offensively, lifted them up to 26th in the league in goals per game. Same couldn't be said for their fate defensively late in the season. Still finished second to last in this category, allowing 3.56 goals per game. In terms of shots on goal allowed per game, the Blackhawks also in the bottom of the league in this category, allowing 31.11 per night, which isn't all that surprising considering the numbers we saw them allow this year and how frequently they were getting outpossessed and outshot, which I also mentioned when diving through the offensive numbers yesterday. One of the bright spots for the Blackhawks defensively this year, and a bright spot for them as a whole, was just the special teams unit. The Hawks were 8th on the power play. They were also 14th in the NHL on the penalty kill. So in the top half of the league in both of these categories, 79.3% on the PK for the season. And I really believe this is a unit that has a ton of upside considering the defensemen who are going to be anchoring this penalty kill unit are only going to get more and more experience these next couple of years. And also something I highlighted late in the season when the Hawks just went on this incredible shorthanded goal run is not only do they have guys who are great penalty killers in their own right, really defensively responsible, and a guy like Frank Nazar and Oliver Moore coming up through the system. And then, guys like Nick Foligno, who's already a trusted upon veteran. Same with Ilya Mikheyev. Teuvo Teravainen can chip in on the penalty kill, but also the speed that Frank Nazar, Oliver Moore, and Ilya Mikheyev play with as well can lead to a lot of shorthanded opportunities for this Blackhawks team. And we definitely saw that more when the kids were on the roster, and that influx of speed was so evident there late in the season. So super exciting to see the future really bud and blossom on the scene while shorthanded there late in the season, with Frank Nazar really at the helm of that. In terms of penalty minutes that the Blackhawks took this year, right around middle of the pack, 279 penalty minutes, which I think definitely helped their cause while shorthanded. Again, one of the best units, one of the best aspects of this Blackhawks team, I should say, this season. Then diving into the analytics, I went through the 5-on-5 analytics for the season yesterday when diving through the offensive stuff. I'm going to talk about just the defensive numbers in particular here today. In terms of Corsi 4, aka shot attempts against versus shot attempts for, the Blackhawks 32nd in the NHL in Corsi 4. Like I mentioned yesterday, they were 30th in the NHL in total shot attempts against at even strength, allowing 4,249. Not that that number's all that relevant. In terms of the shots percentage, I mentioned the Blackhawks 32nd in the NHL in that category as well. In shots against in particular, they were 31st. So it's not like it was just the offense that was struggling. It was both the offense and the defense, leading to them being so poor in all of these analytical categories. In the goals for column, the Blackhawks surrendered 207 goals at even strength. That was actually dead last in the NHL. So for them to be 30th in that category means they actually did some pretty decent things on the offensive side of things compared to defense. Scoring chances, the Blackhawks dead last in this category as a whole, 31st in terms of scoring chances allowed. And then they were also 31st in high danger chances allowed with 838 on the season as well. So it wasn't just the offense where the Blackhawks were lacking, and that's why their analytics as a whole were so terrible. No, it was a combination of both. Defensively, they weren't all that sound, and I don't think that's really a surprise given the amount of youngsters they had in the lineup, also just the overall inconsistencies that some of the veterans played with. Seth Jones, while he had a good offensive season, there were some defensive deficiencies in there as well. Connor Murphy missed a chunk of the season. Alec Martinez was injured. TJ Brody was super inconsistent. So that led to a lot of, play from Ethan Del Mastro, Louis Crevier, Wyatt Kaiser, up until Artyom Levshunov and Sam Rinzel were able to jump on the scene there later in the season. So kind of what I take away from these defensive stats as a whole, it's really hard to, they're obviously glaringly bad, but it's hard to put a ton of stock into these stats when a lot of these kids who are going to be puzzle pieces, who are again going to return next year, as I'll dive into here in just a second, they're still so early in their development path. It's kind of hard to hold that against them. And it also kind of makes it difficult to talk about where this Blackhawks defense can improve this year from a general manager perspective, because really, I think it's just all about these kids starting to gel and mesh with one another while continuing to mature and gain experience, get stronger, get faster, all those things at the same point in time, because most of them are just so young. But before I get into that a little bit more, I do want to talk about some individual stats from the defensemen, because I didn't mention it yesterday in the offensive outlook because there was enough things to dive through with all of those forwards in particular. But I did want to be sure to mention how the defensemen impacted the offensive side of the game. And I do think that's one thing we should consider as Blackhawks fans. How this offense can get better moving forward as well is just these guys continuing to take that next step, because we know from what we saw from Sam Rinzel late in the year, what we saw from Artyom Levshunov, what we know Wyatt Kaiser can do, what we know Kevin Korchinski can hopefully turn into here in a couple of years. We know there's a lot of skill there. It's just, again, about kind of putting it together at this point. Alex Vlasic was the leading point scorer among all Blackhawks defensemen this season, though, with 30 points in 82 games. He had a 42.29 Corsi for percentage on the season, which I think is a little bit more reflective into his role. Connor Murphy, same thing with his Corsi for 45.07, which is actually pretty fair among Blackhawks defensemen. He had 19 points in 62 games on the year, 2 goals and 17 assists. Wyatt Kaiser had 8 points in 57 games, 4 goals and 4 assists. He had 47.18 Corsi for percentage, which for his sample size, which was larger than the rookies, obviously, who came on later in the season, he had some of the best analytics among all Blackhawks players this season, and I pointed that out several times. Kevin Korchinski, 2 points in 16 games for him, 1 goal and 1 assist. 44.49 Corsi for percentage. Ethan Del Mastro had 6 points, 2 goals, and 4 assists in 24 games with a 47.52 Corsi for percentage. Good stuff from EDM. Artyom Levshunov tallied 6 assists in his first 18 career NHL games with a 44.29 Corsi for percentage. Sam Rinzel had 5 assists in 9 games, carrying a 47.44 Corsi for percentage. Small sample size, but really sharp analytics there from Rinzel. Louis Crevier played in 32 games for the Blackhawks this year, tallying 4 points, 3 goals, and 1 assist, and had a 41.16 Corsi for percentage. And then Nolan Allen had 8 points in 43 games, mostly in the first half of the season, 1 goal and 7 assists with a 41.73 Corsi for percentage. So taking a look at the team statistics, taking a look at those individual statistics, and talk about kind of what needs to be addressed this summer. I think first, like I alluded to, we need to take a look at who's going to be returning on this blue line for the Blackhawks next year. Looking at their Puckpedia, used to be cap friendly, pour one out for them. We know Alec Martinez is officially retiring. He's hanging up the skates after this year. TJ Brody very likely has already played his final game as a Blackhawk. Just did not work out here for him. Very likely going to be bought out here this summer. The real interesting ones for the Blackhawks are Wyatt Kaiser and Louis Crevier, both restricted free agents here this summer. I think it would be absolutely bananas not to bring back Wyatt Kaiser. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Louis Crevier, though, considering we do now have more right-handed options up at the pro level in Sam Rinzel and Artyom Levshunov. Connor Murphy still has another year under contract, right? So there's not the need for right-handed defensemen like there was a year or two ago, and I do think that could make Louis Crevier expendable. However, as an RFA, I do think there's a good possibility the Blackhawks bring him back as well. But just talking about some potential pairings for next season, which, again, I know is very hard to do at this point in time, but Alex Vlasic and Sam Rinzel, looking at the way they played together, albeit in a 9-game sample size there late in the season, Sam Rinzel looked more than capable at the NHL level. I mean, 5 assists in 9 games. He didn't look out of place. There's still some, defensive things he needs to clean up, but that's expected for a kid in his first NHL stint. He looks ready to play in the NHL. It's going to come down to how he fares, during training camp and in the preseason, and that's the case for a lot of these guys. But I think the Blackhawks are going to give every opportunity in the world for Sam Rinzel to open up next season on the NHL roster, and I pretty much expect him to. I would not be surprised whatsoever to see Vlasic and Rinzel open up the season as the top pairing. it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with guys like Ethan Del Mastro, Wyatt Kaiser, and Artyom Levshunov. But to me, all three of those guys have proved they deserve more minutes in the NHL. I don't really see, if they want to over-marinate Levshunov, I'd understand that. But for Del Mastro and Kaiser in particular, I think it's time for them to be full-time NHLers 100%. Del Mastro, I thought, looked really sharp in his couple of stints. Wyatt Kaiser really started to put it all together there late in the season. And Artyom Levshunov in his 18-game tryout looked very capable as well. Looked like he could handle things, even though he's only 19 years old. I think there's a pretty darn good chance he's on the NHL roster to open up next season. And that leaves Connor Murphy. Hypothetically, that could be the six to open up next season for the Blackhawks: Vlasic, Rinzel, Del Mastro, Murphy, and Wyatt Kaiser, and Artyom Levshunov. I think Kevin Korchinski definitely needs more time to marinate down in Rockford. And Nolan Allen, there's really no need to rush him. And I have Vlasic, Del Mastro, and Kaiser ahead of him in the pecking order as left-handed defensemen. And it's not the worst thing for Nolan Allen to continue to develop down with the IceHogs as well. So maybe the Blackhawks, what I will say here is if they want one of Rinzel or Levshunov to be down in Rockford, or if they're not positive both of those guys can make the opening night roster, maybe there is an addition to the right side of this defensive unit. And you got to think about the Blackhawks still having to reach the salary cap floor. Maybe they do want to give out some money to another defenseman to join on here, but I don't see any need to bring in a left-handed defenseman. I think it's fully time for Vlasic, Del Mastro, and Kaiser to be the three lefties on the roster come opening night. Now, again, there's still a lot to be proved come training camp and the preseason in the fall, but hypothetically, doesn't really look like there's a lot of additions that can be made from general manager Kyle Davidson's perspective here in the summer. If there is, it's probably one addition to the right side of this blue line. But as far as how this defensive core can get better moving forward, I really just believe it's getting more reps with one another, establishing that chemistry, starting to sort through who's going to be potential defensive partners of the future, possibly, and just continuing to get more reps and gain NHL experience. And as we saw late in the season, these kids are already pretty darn good. So I have I don't want to say like high hopes for them next season. Again, I don't think this Blackhawks team is going to be contending for a Stanley Cup playoff spot or anything, but the way these kids can play the game, the pace in which they play with, the size that they have on the back end, they're not going to be overtly physical yet because they're not grown men, but it's starting to build and go through that process. I think that's the next step for this blue line as a whole, because it's finally that time where a lot of these future puzzle pieces are on the NHL scene, and it should be super fun to watch them build and grow alongside each other. And I really think that's the next step for this defensive unit to take, is as a whole, as one unit, becoming that brotherhood on the back end. And yeah, should be very fun to watch all of these kids be on the NHL scene. I really expect, Sam Rinzel, Artyom Levshunov, Ethan Del Mastro, Wyatt Kaiser. These kids look fully ready to handle the NHL experience. And with the Blackhawks being where they're at in their point of the rebuild, there's no reason to deny them of that opportunity next season. So there is my Chicago Blackhawks defensive outlook following the 24-25 season. Be on the lookout for my goaltending outlook dropping tomorrow. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, make sure to stick with me for segment 2, as I'll be talking about Marek Vanacker joining on with the Rockford IceHogs for the Calder Cup Playoffs. But first, I got to talk to you all real quick about Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Well, then go and crack into a great source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, with each 1 ounce serving having 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, they're packed with fiber to help keep you feeling fuller longer. And who doesn't love a good pistachio? I know I certainly do. I could literally sit there eating and cracking them all day long. And the satisfying crack of opening each shell, it's like a mini snack meditation. So whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids at school, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch by visiting wonderfulpistachios.com in order to learn more. Again, that's wonderfulpistachios.com to check it out today. Segment 2, while we still do not have an update on 2023 third-round pick Nick Lardis at this point, since Blackhawks general manager Kyle Davidson spoke during his exit interviews, sadly, Nick Lardis won't have a chance to return for Brantford during the OHL playoffs at this point, as the Bulldogs were eliminated by the Oshawa Generals in the second round over the weekend. Lardis, of course, got injured in Game 2, a lower body injury, looked like knee-on-knee contact along the boards, and Brantford went on to lose their next 4 games, 3, 4, 5, and 6, to drop their second-round series to the Oshawa Generals 4-2. A devastating blow for Brantford, considering they were the top-seeded team in their conference. I really thought they had a good chance to make the OHL final, an opportunity to go head-to-head with the juggernaut that is the London Knights, but losing Nick Lardis just seemed to take the fight out of Brantford. And I mean, first guy to score 70 goals in this league since John Tavares. That's a tough piece to lose. So unfortunately, Brantford wasn't able to overcome the loss to Nick Lardis. Their season has officially come to a close. One silver lining of that happening, though, Blackhawks fans, and again, we don't have an update on Nick Lardis. I promise whenever we hear more, I will break it down right here on Locked On Blackhawks. But one silver lining of the Brantford Bulldogs being eliminated from the OHL playoffs over the weekend is that it allowed 2024 first-round pick Marek Vanacker to join on with the Rockford IceHogs for the Calder Cup Playoffs, as Vanacker has already signed his ELC with the Blackhawks organization and has been deemed eligible to take part in those Calder Cup Playoffs that I just mentioned. And for Vanacker, finished off the season on a high note. I talked about how things went for him many times here on the show. Kind of a sluggish start to the campaign for him after he was coming off of off-season shoulder surgery, didn't get a regular training camp, and was a little slow in terms of the production to open up the season, but definitely picked it up late in the year and had a pretty good OHL postseason run with 11 points, 6 goals, and 5 assists in 11 postseason games. And I'm really curious to see how he's going to look in AHL postseason action, assuming he gets into the lineup with Rockford. And by the way, the IceHogs, as I've mentioned on the show in the past, will be taking part in the Calder Cup Playoffs best of 3 play-in series once again here this year, starting tomorrow night. And I'll be having a full preview of that best of 3 series on tomorrow's episode as well. So another good thing to be on the lookout for. But yeah, really interested to see how Marek Vanacker is going to look should he get into the IceHogs lineup. And with him being a former first-round pick, I expect that to be the case. But yeah, super stoked to see how he's going to handle that playoff intensity. Good experience for a young Marek Vanacker, who, by the way, because of his age, will be either NHL or OHL next season. He won't be eligible to play for the Rockford IceHogs, I believe. I believe that to be the case. Not 100% positive, but pretty sure on that. But should that be the case, he's very likely. I mean, I don't see him being part of the Blackhawks NHL plans next season. There's really no reason to remove him from Brantford, where he's going to be the guy for that team. Should hopefully put up, an 100+ point season on the top line, getting loads of opportunities. And he was an 82-point player during his draft year, and obviously had some high expectations going into this season, but missed a good chunk of the year due to that injury. So hopefully he'll be able to get a full season's worth of workload next year, put up some high point totals, and then head into the pro scene with some really good confidence. But getting a little taste of the AHL level here with the Rockford IceHogs in the Calder Cup playoffs. Before I jump on into segment 3, I did want to get into a brief update on what's going on in the other OHL playoff series. I've already discussed Martin Misiak, Ty Henry, and the Erie Otters getting swept to the hands of the London Knights in the second round. While the series between AJ Spelliscy and the Windsor Spitfires and Jack Pridham and the Kitchener Rangers has been epic up until this point in time. Game 7 coming between Windsor and Kitchener. After Windsor took a 3-0 series lead early, Kitchener battled back to win games 4, 5, and 6, and Jack Pridham has been a huge part of that. Game 6, he was the man. 2-goal performance for him, leading his team to a 4-0 victory, one of those coming on a penalty shot. He now has 10 points, 6 goals, and 4 assists in 11 postseason games. AJ Spellacy, by the way, he pulled the Gabriel Landeskog from last night. He took part in pregame warmups for Game 6, hasn't played since Game 1 of this series, missed a couple of games in Windsor's opening round matchup, but wasn't able to play in the game. Did not play in the game, after participating in the pregame skate. We'll see if he'll be healthy enough to return for this do or die Game 7 between Kitchener and Windsor. Should be super fun, with the winner having a matchup in the next round with the top-seeded London Knights. But there is my quick OHL playoff update. Coming up in just a minute, Blackhawks fans, before I close out today's show, I want to talk for a moment about Dan Bylsma and Peter Laviolette recently being fired. First, though, I got to talk to you all quickly about the fine folks over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is now giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 worth of bonus bets if your first bet wins. It's 250 extra bucks that you can use on everything, from buzzer beaters to early round upsets, and even who's going to lift the trophy when it's all said and done. Plus, after the game tips off, you even can still combine live prop bets into a same game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out on this incredible offer. Again, $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All you got to do is head on over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen, here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, up until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned, you can get local analysis on a national scale with the coverage you love from Locked On. Go and find Locked On NHL Game Night right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, the NHL coaching carousel continues to spin round and round here as Dan Bylsma became the latest coach to get canned yesterday by the Seattle Kraken. I also haven't discussed on the show yet Peter Laviolette being let go by the New York Rangers. Greg Cronin was also fired from the Anaheim Ducks. John Tortorella, I briefly talked on the show about him being fired from the Philadelphia Flyers. I thought about giving a full segment on the show to John Tortorella, but quite honestly, if the Blackhawks, I'd be stunned if they even gave John Tortorella an interview, considering how things went for him in Philadelphia, how things went for him in his stint prior. He clearly hasn't meshed all that well with young players, and that's the name of the game for the Blackhawks right here, right now. Just doesn't seem like a logical fit whatsoever, and I'd honestly have my jaw dropped if the Blackhawks even gave a formal interview to John Tortorella. But I do expect the Blackhawks' formal interview process to begin here pretty soon. As Kyle Davidson said in his exit interview, they kind of want to jump on this. They don't want to wait as long as they did with Luke Richardson to name their next head coach. So I fully expect these interviews to start here within the next week or two. But Dan Bylsma and Peter Laviolette, while they aren't my two favorite candidates, and I've been pretty outspoken thus far about David Carl and Mike Sullivan, who obviously we're still circling here. We don't know if he's going to be a part of this coaching carousel, but should he wind up hitting the free agent market, definitely someone the Blackhawks should be intrigued by. Those are my two favorite potential options for the Blackhawks. My third would probably be Todd Nelson. I mentioned during Mailbag Monday some guys currently under contract. Rick Tocchet could be a potential option. We don't know what's happening with him in Vancouver. Jay Woodcroft, who was fired by the Edmonton Oilers, is somewhat intriguing to me. Not as much so as Todd Nelson, but I do think Dan Bylsma and Peter Laviolette are two guys who could be worthy of interviews from the Chicago Blackhawks. For Bylsma, he's a former Stanley Cup champion in his first season as an NHL head coach with the Pittsburgh Penguins. He actually qualified for the Stanley Cup playoffs, and every season he was behind the bench for the Pens from 2008 to 2014. However, I should also point out that after he got replaced, Mike Sullivan, in those first couple of seasons, Pittsburgh Penguins went on to win 2 more Stanley Cups. So that is one thing to consider there. But Dan Bylsma also had his share of success with the Pens, went back to the conference final one other time as the Pens bench boss. Since departing Pittsburgh, though, hasn't gone as well for him as a head coach. 2 seasons with the Buffalo Sabres, although definitely worth considering it is the Buffalo Sabres. Missed out on the playoffs both years there, finishing 7th and 8th in the Atlantic Division. And then, of course, he was just the head coach of the Seattle Kraken only for this one season. And I think it was pretty unfair to fire Dan Bylsma after only 1 year. However, Kraken are making a change at general manager as well. There's kind of some moving parts going on there. Laviolette, unfortunately, fell victim to that, but wasn't a very good year for him in Seattle either. Although from what I've seen on social media, it seems like a lot of Kraken fans don't necessarily think it was his fault, but the team did go an underwhelming 35-41-6 and finished 7th in the Pacific Division. So the last 3 years, Dan Bylsma has been a head coach in the NHL. His team hasn't finished better than 7th. He hasn't been in an ideal situation, though it is something to be considered, and does have previous Stanley Cup champion history and a lot of experience in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Ultimately, though, Dan Bylsma, while I wouldn't be upset if the Blackhawks interviewed him, he's not necessarily someone that moves the needle to me whatsoever, and has kind of had a lot of time removed from his last success as an NHL head coach over a decade ago at this point in time. Peter Laviolette, well, he's not an ideal candidate for me either. He definitely is more intriguing to me than Dan Bylsma. Won the Stanley Cup with the Carolina Hurricanes way back in 2005. Also made the Stanley Cup final in his first year as the head coach for the Philadelphia Flyers against our Chicago Blackhawks in 2010. Also took the Nashville Predators to the Stanley Cup final in 2017, and then just recently made the conference finals with the New York Rangers in 2023 before they missed out on the playoffs this year, ultimately leading him to get fired. What I will say, if neither Mike Sullivan nor, someone like Rick Tocchet hits the market, or Todd Nelson isn't available, that's when I think someone like Peter Laviolette could be more intriguing for the Blackhawks. I think he's definitely, again, more likely to get an interview or more likely to be considered than Dan Bylsma, but not someone that fully moves the needle to me, but is someone that does have a lot of experience in this league. I just don't know if it's necessarily with a young group who's trying to take that next step. I feel like he's more of a coach who's ready to go in win now mode, and we know the Blackhawks just aren't in that point in time. So neither of these head coaches really do it for me, although again, just considering the market in general, wouldn't be surprising to see them get interviews from the Chicago Blackhawks, but really feels like we've heard David Carl is the guy getting circled. Blackhawks are going to give it a good run for him. We'll see what winds up happening with Mike Sullivan. Those are my top 2 candidates along with Todd Nelson. No one else really moving the needle for me, but I'll make sure to talk through all of these candidates and all the candidates the Blackhawks give out interviews through as this coaching hiring process is only at the beginning here, Blackhawks fans, and I'm sure we'll be getting more news on it starting here soon. But that's going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and hit that subscribe button. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. That way, you can get the show, the latest episode, as soon as it becomes available each and every day. Until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Tuesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.